What's up guys, hope you're doing well, and welcome back to another episode. Today we take on not just one, but two 16-bit beat-em-up classics with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Hyperstone Heist. Several months ago, when family was visiting, we all knew my nephew Gavin would want to play some games, so I made sure to record our footage. We suited up with a couple TMNT shirts and defeated Shredder in both games on hard difficulty. Unsurprisingly, these timeless hits proved again to be just that, and it's still a lot of fun for all ages. He's almost there. There we go. Yeah, he's tough. I swear, he's like the hardest boss in the game. He's brutal.
He's super mean.
Yeah, he is super mean. Cowabunga! Moving on to the next.
Why is he mean?
Oh, I don't know. We're not welcome here, though, that's for sure. Basically, everybody already knows Turtles in Time originated in the arcades.
Pizza power!
As the successor of the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game. The original arcade classic would have also been an excellent Super Nintendo port opportunity, but as timing and fate would have it, Nintendo fans only got to experience what was possible on their NES. In 1992, Super Nintendo players were abundantly blessed with Turtles in Time on their new 16-bit machine. While this title was an exclusive, Konami did manage to play on both sides of the fence, with the Super Nintendo's biggest rival, the Sega Genesis. Ninja Turtles The Hyperstone Heist was an answer back, with their best attempt to bring that exact same type of explosive turtle excitement to Sega's 16-bit machine. Between the sound effects, soundtracks, color palettes, and stage designs, the two games really do make for an interesting compare and contrast. Between the two games, a TMNT fan receives just about everything they could hope for, with all 4 turtles being selectable and 2 playable at a time. There are 15 levels across all sorts of unique and cool settings, with multiple memorable boss fights of the most iconic Ninja Turtles villains, seen in the comics and further popularized in the 90s cartoons and movies. Just as we've done before with other titles on the channel, we will be flipping back and forth between the games to further appreciate and enhance the differences. In order to fully dissect the gameplay, we'll be playing through both games as Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. Then once more with the turtle that proves to be the best on hard mode. Plus, can't forget about the 2-player playthrough as well. So please, grab a slice of your favorite pizza and harness all of your turtle power as we take on Shredder for a total of 12 showdowns. Because I'm Jeff, and this is MarMax Gaming. At first, I wasn't sure if it made sense to show one game before the other, as we did with Aladdin, since they're such different games. These are certainly 2 different games, but at their roots, they have a lot of core similarities. My childhood history is with Turtles in Time. It was one of the original handful of games that we had for our Super Nintendo. I didn't play through Hyperstone Heist until later in college, and it was so freaking epic getting to experience this other half of 16-bit TMNT beat-em-up action that I'd only seen on rental shelves when looking for Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64 rentals. First, let's check out their intros. This is something I remember super fondly. It's so sick. If you're not at least a little bit pumped, something's probably wrong with you. I will say though, there are some sprites in the game that don't take the zooming so well, and they didn't even attempt it in the Genesis. But isn't this a sweet touch, how it ends with Leo's sword cutting through the menu? It's a cool sound too. There are some options to review, and there are actually some important choices in here that do affect your gameplay. One is the auto back attack, which means your turtle will turn around on their own if an enemy approaches while you're attacking. It can be a pretty foolproof way to play for beginners that don't really know what's going on, but sometimes if you're surrounded, your turtle may turn around when you want to keep attacking somebody in front of you. I usually turn that off. There's also the auto dash, which means your turtle walks for a little bit, then starts running. It's another good thing to leave on if you are trying to make it even more foolproof for beginners, but the much better option is the manual dash, which is just a quick double tap, giving you much more precise and useful control of the dash. Lastly, and most important of all, of course, is the color, because you have to decide if you want the comic style or the regular color from the show, where they're all the same hue of green. It's honestly just more of a mood type of decision, but it's actually really thoughtful of them to include if you think about it. Talk about being loyal to the source material. Here we go, we'll start on normal, but for the better ending, we will talk about the hard mode differences at the end. Time to select our character. I vividly remember just being in love with this screen as a kid. I played it in early elementary school all the time, and it regularly just sizzled in my brain. We're going to look at all the characters too as we go to talk about and show off their differences. Let's start off with their leader, Leonardo. The plot in both games is pretty silly. In Turtles in Time, Krang steals the Statue of Liberty, so it's a matter of national pride that we get this statue back. Hyperstone Heist is almost the same thing, except it's not just the statue, it's the entire city. Growing up with the Super Nintendo version of this song, and then hearing what the Sega Genesis can do years later, it sure does pull on your heartstrings. It sounds amazing. As mentioned before, these games do share the same roots. Notice how the plot is really set up the same way. But instead of being grabbed by Super Krang, there's a wavy effect as it all disappears and winds up on Shredder's table. Which is pretty incredible, to be honest. Not that this wasn't impressive by Krang, but seriously, the whole city? They also used new sprites for Shredder, which is pretty cool to see. The Turtles say they'll track him down using their high energy detector. Let's check out the first couple of levels. Turtles in Time starts out near the Big Apple at 3 a.m.
Big Apple, 3 a.m.
Something really cool that these games do is give you a silhouette of the stage's boss, which is so great for building a bit of suspense and keeps you looking forward to the next fight. This first impression out on the New York Bridge is excellent. Attack sound effects crack and crunch to satisfaction, and the music. This is only the beginning of one of the best Super Nintendo soundtracks of all time. They managed to bring all the hype and excitement through their music, which perfectly complements the quickly paced fighting action. It's one thing for a game to have a lot of enemies, and it's another to see how they go about placing and introducing their enemies. As you start to get into the flow of the game, it's not just as simple as mashing Y. That'll work well enough to a point, especially on 2-player, but taking on solo requires learning the best of your turtle's abilities. You have to learn and become worthy to get the most out of your turtle. There's so much more to keep your hands and mind busy than just walking up to an enemy and mashing Y. It may just take a bit of time to realize that. Shockingly, you can do like 4 different jump attacks, all with the same 2 buttons, depending on your timing. The standard jump kick, a floaty jump attack with your weapon, the quick and low jump attack, which is great for getting enemies off of you, and an unusual forward lunging jump kick if you attack as you're coming back close to the ground. You have 2 different dash attacks as well. The shoulder check if you attack while running. You can also press jump while running, which gives you an evasive handspring that you can attack out of, resulting in a sliding dash attack. There's also your special attack, which has its time and place, since it is strong, but takes some of your life away as a trade. A smart time to use it is when you've got a boss on the ropes and you have some decent life left, so you can finish them off quickly. The point is, you have options out here. Since we made the dash manual, it's satisfying to pull off multiple shoulder checks in a row, or use one to close the gap before grabbing for the slams, which is 2 points instead of 1. Plus, each foot soldier caught by the slamming also rewards you with 2 points. And if you can manage to position yourself and press the buttons just right, you'll throw the foot soldier toward the screen out of the picture, rewarding you with 3 points. Every 200 points gets you an extra life, which definitely helps quite a bit when trying to beat the whole thing without a game over. You don't have to do this, you can continue from the game over screen a few times, but I always felt it was a good challenge, at least for me, to go with 5 to 7 lives on normal. Throughout the levels, there are different little scenarios how soldiers are spawned, making each stage feel lively, and it's a fun thing to pay attention to through multiple playthroughs. There's the occasional item that you can strike to inflict damage on your enemies. There's pizza to grant a full refill of health. If your health is already high, might as well try to defeat every enemy on screen before going to grab it. Since you start new levels with full health, it is pivotal to runs if you can manage to hold on with barely any health, making every hit count. As mentioned, as we go, we will note differences in playstyle with the turtles, but just like basically any beat-em-ups, you want to avoid getting surrounded, timing of attacks, jumps, and that wrist slamming to avoid getting your health chipped away. Solo Turtles in Time players know that you can find yourself in dangerous situations pretty quickly, even if things were going great just a second beforehand. There are some decent environmental hazards used on various levels, and I always thought it was pretty funny how gigantic Super Krang is, even though he's just a bit bigger than us later in the game. The audio-video in Turtles in Time is overall epic, and the boss themes are no exception, plus they often have cool lead-in lines before the fight. Baxter the Fly is a great first level boss, requiring the player to stand out of the way of shots, then lining up with jump attacks when he's in the air. When he actually lands and walks around is when you're able to put more damage on him. As bosses get more damage in the game, the faster they blink red, and the more deadly they become, meaning you have to stay sharp through the entire fight in order to not lose a life. Let's check out the first section of Hyperstone Heist. There's no boss silhouettes here, just a suspenseful text scroll, which may not look quite the same, but that will keep you guessing since you don't know who you'll find where. Scene 1 is New York City. You can always leave it to the Sega Genesis versions of games to keep showing me things I didn't know I was missing. I love that you start out in the sewers. It's so cool. It makes perfect sense. The sound effects and the music are basically the same, except they've all been Sega-fied, and they make for a great contrast of a look and listen. The scoring for foot soldiers is different. There's nothing special about the Sega Genesis scoreboard, it's just 1 per enemy. And there's actually no throwing at the screen in this game. It's not a horrible loss though, and must have been that much easier to cut for the team. I do believe Mode 7 on the SNES is what helped them pull it off. An important gameplay difference is your dash ability being assigned to your third button instead of double tapping the D-pad. As far as ease of control goes, even though I played Turtles in Time growing up, I actually think that this works just fine, and it might even be a bit easier, while maybe somebody could argue that the double tapping is what they prefer and perhaps it's more satisfying. It's quite astonishing how they recycled and reused so many assets for this new game. Hyperstone Heist is structured differently as well. There are just 5 levels, but with sections, like for example we start out in the sewer and then move right into the setting of Alley Cat Blues, the second level in Turtles in Time. Overall in Hyperstone Heist, there are 5 lengthier levels as opposed to 10. Things mostly look the same in Alley Cat Blues, but there are some worthwhile differences, like these new cars in the background. One of them is hazardous to your health. And I thought it was a really cool touch having foot soldiers coming out of the back of this box truck too. As more similarities continue, you then may be surprised to notice the abrupt end of the section when comparing the same setting to Turtles in Time. That's because this is only section 2 and we're going back into the sewers. Before we finish off New York City and Hyperstone Heist, let's flip back to level 2 of Turtles in Time while Alley Cat Blues is still fresh on our mind. Plus, if we don't flip back and forth between sections, Hyperstone Heist coverage would actually be in longer chunks and finish only halfway through Turtles in Time. Alley Cat Blues is another awesome environment
Alley Cat Blues.
where we take to the streets in our continued pursuit of Shredder. The music is so good. Enemies come from ladders, doorways, over fences, and wait for you in the alley. The little mechs can be pretty annoying too if you allow them to get you with their lasers or the shocking lassos. Let's talk about some of the turtle differences. It doesn't take too long to recognize the slowest of the turtle speeds, like Michelangelo and Donatello, versus the speediness of Raphael. Leonardo is in between as the most balanced character. The characters are overall well balanced though. While Mike and Don are the slowest moving, Mikey has the strongest standard attacks and the strongest defense. Mikey also has a slight delay before his first attack comes out, which no other turtle has, and it can cost you in some high pressure situations. Although, once again, his great defense and strong attacks turn that delay into almost a non-issue. And Donatello has such a long reach on his first swing that it's great to keep enemies at a distance and easy to work around his slow speed. You have to look out and avoid falling in the manholes for a bit of lost life, which further plays off the environment, just like hitting the fire hydrants or the sewer lids that get thrown your way when the foot soldiers pop out. Where we saw Hyperstone Heist end this section, it actually continues into room for more enemies and the boss fight against Mecha Turtle. You know things are personal when he refers to you as Slim Balls, obviously meant to be slime balls. The crashing sound effects of this new, heavier boss as he jumps around is really awesome. Plus he's got some unique attacks like the way his limbs stretch out, and when he backs up to shoot lasers from top to bottom. He's not too bad to avoid and to catch during openings once you see how it all works. But he has a bunch of cool moves and sound effects, and he's a really entertaining second boss. Let's continue with Turtles in Time as we move into the first bonus level,
Sewer Surfing.
Sewer Surfin'. This is when the Super Nintendo port begins to deviate from the arcade original the most. And there are some interesting details about it too. As we've seen for 2 levels in a row, it's the silhouette of the boss at the beginning, right? We'll have to wait and see. In the arcade version of Sewer Surfin', after fighting these alien lookalikes, or as the manual refers to them, chunky cheese pizza monsters, and getting through the environmental hazards like the few spike gates and some layers of the spike balls that make your turtle cry out in pain if his feet come into contact. In the arcade, this is actually where a giant hologram of Shredder's head inexplicably appears to banish the turtles to a time warp. But there's actually a level to complete in the Super Nintendo version. The bonus levels aren't meant to be too tough. Many one-hit enemies that can help add a bit to your points, along with the abundance of pizza boxes that also add to your score counters. Here, we actually get a brand new boss with Rat King, who comes in on his giant footski machine. And says, first the sewers, then the world, which is pretty hilarious. I find it pretty interesting that they didn't give us a Rat King silhouette, but maybe this was to keep the surprise alive for Turtles in Time players. I also find it kind of odd that he's the only boss to have an arrow saying breakpoint, as if the first thing you wouldn't try to do is attack the front of his machine. Rat King is actually one of the easiest and biggest jokes of a boss, since you can often just beat his ass while he's still off screen, so you don't even get to see too much of him if you're not getting hit by his laser or spike balls. Once Rat King is defeated, we are on our way to an excellent Super Nintendo exclusive level in the Technodrome. Let's flip back to Hyperstone Heist and see how New York City finishes up. We're back in the sewer with a different looking floor. It's all wavy and wet. There are more groups of foot soldiers to fight, which is no surprise. But what might surprise you is what we see a bit later in the level. Looks familiar, right? The yellow monsters are coming out of the floor just as they did in Sewer Surfin'. It's kinda neat to fight these guys in a slightly different situation. And before too long, we encounter Hyperstone Heist's first real boss, with Leatherhead, the giant gator. He has a pretty silly lead-in line, "You're too immature to hang with me." Okay. Turtles in Time players would recognize this guy from later stages, but actually he's not a very tough boss fight, so using him in the beginning, this giant reptile in the sewers, is surprisingly perfect. You just have to slide over to get some hits in and get out of the way when he goes to crawl across. The projectile knives and lobsters aren't too tough to avoid. If you get too close on the side, you'll get spun across the screen. But overall, he's pretty simple to attack and get out of the way, and to take out without losing a life. After seeing those pizza alien enemies, you might be thinking, it's too bad there wasn't any surfing action leading up to this. Well, let's continue on to the next level. In Scene 2, a mysterious ghost ship. And there we are, with surfing action, not in the sewers, but out in the ocean it looks like. I guess these surfboards have motors in them to make all this work. But anyway, it's cool to see the obstacles section make its way outside, and to see a different layout. Plus, we even get to see some mousers floating around out here too, and that's nothing we've seen before in Turtles in Time. This section has the sun setting as we enter into the next. We're inside the mysterious ship, and it sure is cool to see the background layered behind the ship walls. Aside from all of the foot soldiers, the rock soldiers are actually introduced earlier in the Genesis. You also get to see some obstacles that you may recognize from the train level in Turtles in Time, but used here on the ship, and it works nicely. The ship eventually pulls to another new looking environment inside this blue cave. While the ghost ship shared similarities with the pirate ship era in Turtles in Time, this cave section has some similarities with the dinosaur era of Turtles in Time. After fighting through many more foot soldiers, the boss to cap off level 2 is Rocksteady, and he's an entirely unique boss to Hyperstone Heist. We will see Rocksteady later in Turtles in Time, but he's pirate themed there and completely different. He actually fights pretty similarly to Leatherhead here though. You string together some attacks and then get out of the way of his rush. Rocksteady also has a gun and some grenades that he hardly uses if you don't wait forever to attack him. As he walks around before he thinks about attacking, it looks like he's doing a chicken impression. As long as you jump when he runs your way, you're going to avoid him every time. After doing this enough times, the fight is followed with the edgiest trash talk of all. Before we move on to Scene 3, Shredder's Hideout, this is a good moment to flip back to Turtles in Time. Let's get into the fourth level, the Technodrome.
Technodrome. Let's kick shout.
At the end of this section, we actually get to experience our first of double boss fights. The Technodrome is overall a pretty impressive and cool environment for being an entirely new addition that we didn't get in the arcade. It's full of techie details that really bring it to life and make you feel like you're in there. As you're moving around with more and more foot soldiers, your comfort with quickly getting yourself out of tight spots with dashes, jump kicks, and handsprings or slide kicks, you'll find yourself learning and rising to the occasion of more and more foot soldiers. In the background, there's so many moving parts. It's all intricate and advanced looking, with all the lights, conveyor belts of mousers, secret ooze in the background, a bunch of TVs that come on. Speaking of secret ooze though, there were 2 bosses that were relocated from later in the arcade to be fought right here. Toka and Razar changed their fighting styles to be a lot more interesting with some elemental attacks. Toka shoots out freezing ice breath, while Razar puffs out fire breath. Mix this in with a couple of physical attacks and the shenanigans they can pull together. It's a really memorable fight, and if you saw Secret of the Ooze back then, seeing them in this game means even more to you. The elevator section is next, and it has you going up, facing waves of different foot soldiers, along with some floors of robots too. It's nice that they have a pizza out there for you to grab whenever you might need it. Hopefully it isn't until you're toward the top, so you can get to the end of the level boss with as much health as possible. After the elevator is when we see another huge addition to the Super Nintendo port, an early boss fight with Shredder before the time warp, with the darkest and coolest lead-in we've had yet. This is freaking epic right here. The way they unveil Shredder in his machine before turning the room 180 degrees, the only way to cause damage is using the very foot soldiers that are sent after you, by hurling them at the screen, and therefore at Shredder, one after another. You have to look out for those crosshairs, or his reaching claws. It's a really clever and fun use of the soldier throw. It's an excellent addition to the game and makes the plot that much better. After you keep pegging Shredder with his own foot soldiers, you'll eventually have his machine breaking down. And this is when we are sent into the first time warp. First, we go way back to the dinosaur era.
Prehistoric Turtlesaurus.
Such a funny stage name, I love it. Prehistoric Turtlesaurus. You might think that this means you'll be fighting dinosaurs, but not exactly. The foot soldiers are also in the same time warp with us at every turn across 4 warps. Somehow, some way. We do get to at least see some dinosaurs stampeding our way or dropping explosives. You can't attack them directly though. The dinosaurs are another example of stage-specific hazards, which is great for variety, and we'll continue to see more of those. We do encounter some new enemies in the time warps though, with rock soldiers. These tougher enemies can take more abuse, and also come running into the screen with their shoulders down. We see them 4 levels in a row, and they're an important addition for enemy variety, not just to stand out against foot soldiers, but the rock soldiers themselves are given different weapons in each area too. Stage hazards and enemies aside though, the biggest challenge is getting through an all-new boss that wasn't in the arcade. In the original, the turtles actually fight against a gigantic blob named Concrete Man, but Slash is much more fitting for a stage like Prehistoric Turtlesaurus. He's honestly a pretty annoying fight because of how often he blocks. You have to either hit him as he's coming back down from a jump, or manage to hit him in the back while his guard isn't up. Certain turtles make Slash easier, like Donatello's super long reach on the first hit helps a lot, and Raph being so fast makes it easy to hit him before he comes down too. But when he gets loose and is swinging that sword, Slash will bash right through your lives pretty quickly. If you don't know how to get in hits while you can before getting out of the way, this guy's going to be an absolute nightmare for you, especially on single player. Let's flip back to Shredder's hideout on Hyperstone Heist. This background is new as well, albeit pretty basic, outside near a fence with an orange sky. As we fight our way along, it's kinda cool how Shredder's hideout has old school booby traps that you have to keep an eye out for. Amongst all the fighting of the foot soldiers, after not too long, you hop inside for another new environment. The new hazards have more traps, like sharp ceilings, bamboo spikes that come through the floor, and lasers that come out of the wall. The toughest foot soldiers to handle are the ones with blockers on their arms. Have to make sure to dash attack or get behind those guys in order to get them to go anywhere. We recently saw Toka and Razar from the second movie, Secret of the Ooze, so it's pretty novel and surreal to see Tatsu as a boss with these graphics. It's honestly just shocking and so sweet to see him here like this. Tatsu fights pretty simple though, just throwing sharp projectiles and also dropping them when he jumps back and forth, while releasing a bunch of foot soldiers at the same time. It's honestly a good call that foot soldiers keep coming, otherwise he'd probably be too easy and a bit boring. Since the projectiles do come out quickly though, it can be tough to string consistent damage on Tatsu without getting caught yourself with the foot soldiers attacking from behind. Speaking of getting caught, you can actually catch him with his own projectiles if you can hit them back his way when timed right. Being that Tatsu is a human and none of these bosses have even been robots, it is pretty silly the way they explode after being beat up with ninja weapons, although it is a really awesome effect. Now that we're moving on to Scene 4 of 5, let's flip back to the next time warp level, aboard a pirate ship in the 1500s.
Skull and crossbone.
Unfortunately, we won't see any folks with their fashion from that era, but you already know there are plenty of foot soldiers, rock soldiers, and planks of wood to get in our way. This soundtrack used to not mean a lot to me. I always knew it was a pretty good song, but for whatever reason, this particular song has crept back into my mind at random times more than I can remember. It's interesting how that happens. I always remember loving Big Apple and Alley Cat Blues, but Skull and Crossbones, for whatever reason, likes to reveal itself in my subconscious. Skull and Crossbones has a solid mix-up with some different foot soldiers, like the all-green ones shooting arrows for example, but the worst and most dangerous of all are the yellow guys with their damned, spiked frisbees. I hate these guys. It goes to show you how much two-player simplifies the game, because I never even considered just how annoying and deadly they are. They not only have this dangerous weapon, but they even seem programmed better than other foot soldiers too. The amount of times they'll throw out a kick and then toss their frisbee at the exact moment it could hit you as you're standing up is staggering. They took at least one life from me with every turtle character. I simply couldn't make it happen. Speaking of some tough enemies though, after your last group of rock soldiers that have some different weapons, you are met with Bebop and Rocksteady. Look at their little outfits, isn't that so great? What's really unique about this fight is only one of them needs to lose their life for the fight to be over, so you don't want to prolong the danger by splitting your attention. You go for one and stick with it until they're done. I went for Rocksteady 3 times in a row, before realizing I probably should see if it's much different going for Bebop. He normally just kinda hangs out until Rocksteady and him tangle their weapons, but going for Bebop is the harder choice because Rocksteady doesn't just hang nearby, he's constantly stabbing in and being a pain. Plus it seemed like Bebop ran around crashing more too. They never tangled weapons though, which I never realized was only a thing if Rocksteady is taking damage. Bebop and Rocksteady are a classic duo, and a super welcome addition to the Turtles in Time boss roster, because it was much different than the fight with Toka and Razar in the arcade. Moving onward from the ship in the seas to a train rolling through trees in the late 1800s. Bury My Shell at Wounded Knee is a reference to Native American and American history. The battle at Wounded Knee resulted in nearly 300 reported deaths of Native Americans and around 40 from the United States Army.
Bury my shell at Wounded Knee.
The music will have you bouncing up and down with an excellent rhythm and beat. As you can see, the level takes place on a train, so it's also playing on the Great Westernization as well. The song also has a totally decent, if not good sounding, hey in the background, using the turtles' voices. This level also has a great entrance where you can shoulder check the barrels and dash to keep up, in order to keep scrolling so the screen doesn't cut it off right away. Just as with the other warps, we've got more variety of foot soldiers and rock soldier enemies. Fortunately, no disc throwing foot soldiers here, and overall it's not necessarily a harder level. It's just another good and fun stage with a cool setting. As we move along, there are more barrels to avoid that fall from above, so you at least have to be on the lookout for those. Speaking of not being much harder of a level though, we see a familiar face. Our second fight against Leatherhead, and you can see I really wasn't kidding when I said he is honestly a decent first level boss since he's not very challenging. You might even assume that he's tougher or more capable in his original form this late in the game, but no, Leatherhead is still a simple guy to avoid. Just attack until he starts pounding his feet and step out of the way. His projectiles aren't even a big deal, and aside from maybe getting tail spun a few times, he's not a very difficult boss to take down. With all of these different environments and fresh bosses in mind, let's see how Hyperstone Heist handles its fourth level. What new things will we see in the Gauntlet? As we could tell from the end of the last level, we entered into a cave and the Gauntlet is actually a run through a lot of things we've already seen before. It starts off with our pizza monster friends, with a more reddish tint, which is pretty interesting, seeing them come out of the solid ground and all. A quick note before it's too late to point out, it took me a few playthroughs to even notice this, but the Chunky Cheese Pizza monsters actually reward you with 3 points for every one of them you take out. They actually get quite a bit of use out of these guys, there's multiple screens worth of them. Then it's a rematch against Leatherhead, same fight as before, just in a different color. We then encounter the second level boss, Rocksteady, for another recolored rematch. It's not like boss rushes aren't cool, I like them. It's just kind of surprising to see it by the 4th level already. It's only about 20 minutes into the game. After seeing those first 2 bosses, could you imagine what comes next? Well, it's Tatsu, of course, in a red robe this time. And like I said, boss fights are fun, so I guess it does beat a cave with just a ton of foot soldiers on their own. And at least we don't make it out of here without an entirely new boss, Baxter Stockman, but before his fly mutation. As he's still a scientist in one of his machines. This is actually where they use the mouser enemies that we saw in the Technodrome. The mousers can be a huge pain in the ass, especially if multiple get on the floor at once. It can be a big problem, and honestly get pretty annoying. But if you can find the rhythm and keep it tight, you just have to keep doing jump attacks to Stockman and wear that health down. And just like that, after 4 boss fights and pizza monsters, we are through the Gauntlet. There's another thing to refer back to what we've seen near the Technodrome as well. With this cutscene being used towards the end of the game, it's a fun change in perspective, as opposed to going into the 4th level in Turtles in Time. Instead of the time warp, it's where we find the end of the game. Speaking of getting toward the end of the game though, let's flip back for a couple stages of Turtles in Time. You know where we go next? Well, to the future, of course.
Neon Knight Riders.
2020? Well, this ought to be good. Can't wait for it to look exactly the same. Honestly, Konami really jumped the gun on just how much everything would change within 30 years. This game's setting is in 1992. Neon Knight Riders serves as another bonus stage, and it's drastically different than the perspective of the arcade. They had to stick with side-scrolling on the original, but the Super Nintendo was used to show off its Mode 7 capabilities in a similar way to F-Zero, another game we've looked at on the channel. Aside from admiring the twilighty, utopian, futuristic city in the distance and smacking some soldiers as they pop up, there's nothing too crazy to talk about. There are some goofy personal helicopter suit enemies too, along with some pizza bonuses to grab and shocking orbs to avoid. But overall, it's just a minute or so of light action accompanied with another wonderful song. Another one I love to listen to on its own. As we are getting turned sideways into a new perspective, which is really cool, we get to see our enemy in the distance, which is a really great introduction. Super Krang, as we've seen twice already, should be freaking massive, but fortunately for us, he shrunk down just for this fight. Just have to look out as you attack because he likes to clap, kick, and shoot rockets out of his chest. It's pretty funny what his heart looks like inside. As damage gets higher is when he starts to prolong the fight with these orbs that shoot high up into the sky and come down from above. Which is cool, but not too tough to avoid, and he's not a very difficult boss to finish off without too much trouble. Next stage is the last one in the time warp, and we continue our way to the year 2100, which is another gross overestimate on what we'll be able to accomplish in the next 80 years. A starbase is something that might never happen if it doesn't somehow end up happening in the next several thousands and thousands of years.
Starbase, where no turtle has gone before.
Aside from stating the obvious, stars are incredibly and unimaginably hot, but our sun is the closest star, and that's about 20 years away by plane. We aren't getting anywhere near one with enough materials, which still ignores the fact that we'd be a fireball about halfway into the trip, and not even talking about what the construction itself would look like. But I'm obviously just overthinking it. It's just another fun excuse to have a technology-themed level with more foot soldiers and rock soldier enemies. There are a handful of stage hazards, like getting frozen by one of those pods, or shocked by a defense laser. There are also a few large balls that you can hit back the other way, if they don't end up bouncing forward and flattening you. We encounter some more droid enemies in this level, which makes sense, and it's at this point in the game where you might start to get maybe a little burnt out on beat 'em up action, and that means that it's a perfect time to be the last stage before the final boss. Getting here with only a couple of lives left means you'll probably get a game over, or at least I did on 2 of the runs with Leo and Raph. Luckily, with Mike's defense and Don's long reach, I was able to get through without a game over on those runs. There are some new enemy weapons and robots used. It's overall a perfectly fine stretch to help finish the game. We fight against Krang again after he evacuated from his traditional suit. Now he's in something even deadlier, a machine that we haven't seen yet. It pretty much circles around, blowing big bubbles out of the side that do surprisingly hurt. There's constant disappearing and reappearing, broken up with you hitting him with jump attacks. When it starts to get more annoying and threatening though is when Krang drops these little mechs each time that he reappears. They can really be a problem with their electric attacks. Luckily, Krang doesn't come back until you have just one left, but you have to make those openings count for hits. It can be pretty challenging to rack up damage on him with how quick he's there, drops robots, and quickly leaves. Sometimes he does a flattening attack where he smashes into the ground, which would catch you off guard since the fight conditions you into pressing in right away as hard as you can for a quick hit. After defeating Krang, it's time for us to finally exit the time warp. Now would be perfect to flip back for our final time to Hyperstone Heist to go back to see the similarities of Stage 5. They use some more Turtles in Time assets, but in a kind of surprising way. This is the futuristic Starbase setting, even though they claim it's in the Technodrome. And that's pretty interesting, because they're all still of those advanced looking parts of the level, but instead of being 2100, it's current day Technodrome. Same music and everything, this time the Starbase theme has a Turtles Hey chant in it. And let's just admit that it's not quite as crisp as the Super Nintendo, but it sounds okay. We could have guessed this by the sound of the end of the stage cowabungas. Although it is the Starbase theme, it does have some Technodrome elements, such as these conveyor belts with mousers coming through the glass, making it a bit of a hybrid between those two stages. It's just another stretch of the Foot Clan, Rock Soldiers, and the stage hazards such as the zapping or freezing, but the freezing is done differently here, with these spray towers coming out of the ground. The final scene in Hyperstone Heist overall is pretty cool though, especially how it's structured by comparison. At the end of the first section, we encounter Krang in his robotic suit. The way they went about adding these introduction sprites before lifting him up out of the screen and turning him sideways is pretty clever, if not downright hilarious. So it's the same type of Super Krang fight as before, except we're in the Starbase setting. It doesn't change a ton, although the individual turtle speeds actually come into play here if they were on the hoverboards before. After the fight with Super Krang, we actually move on to a familiar elevator setting. Except this time, we aren't going up to see Shredder, we are actually going downward, deeper into the heart of the Technodrome. As we've seen this whole time, it's pretty cool hearing the Genesis version of any subsequent track that shares a setting. Overall, it's just floor after floor after floor of various foot soldiers and enemies. Depending on their color or weapon, it can change things a little bit, but best strategy is, as always, close the gap, grabbing that wrist and smashing all of the surrounding foot soldiers. After this elevator is when we move on to the final boss against Super Shredder. For anybody that didn't know, Super Shredder was introduced at the end of Secret of the Ooze when Shredder himself drinks it, giving him superhuman strength. And I swear we had an action figure of him way back in the day. Let's check out both of these fights together since it's the last thing to do for both games.
Technodrome, the final shell shock.
As you can quickly see, Shredder teleports between his 3 attacks. The orange-red glow is for his ground fire attack. Have to get out of the way if you don't want your feet on fire. The blue glow is the easiest time to attack because he shoots his ice waves upward and that'll only hit you if you're jumping. The green glow and orb is something you better step out of the way of too, since it'll mutate you back into your little turtle self and eats right through your lives. It's definitely pretty cool to check out the difference in the settings with the same Shredder fight. Overall, he does move around pretty quickly, especially on hard mode. That's one of the biggest differences, to be honest. But even still, you just have to be patient and wait for the blue phase in order to get your attacks in. Overall, Turtles in Time or Hyperstone Heist are great blasts from the past. Somebody's preference for either one of these games could really just come down to the sound design. Turtles in Time does pack in more of a game, with more bosses and stages, but it's still really cool to see what Hyperstone Heist was able to do with its borrowed assets while also providing some new ones that were really cool to take in. As always, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, especially a video as long as this. Hope you guys had as much fun as we did, and I can't wait to see you for the next episode. And I hope all of you have a great rest of your day.